The following is a presentation of KSL Sports. First and 12. A total roundup of BYU and Utah football and the expanded Big 12 Conference. Brought to you by Macy's Grocery Stores. Your hosts are Mitch Harper and Alex Kirry on KSL News Radio and the KSL Sports Zone.
Welcome back, everyone. First and 12 rolls on hour number 2. If you missed any part of hour number 1, check out the podcast feed. And this show always brought to you by Macy's Grocery Store. Get the freshest fruits and vegetables from local farms and your favorite local brands. Macy's, happy shopping. Alex, it's our favorite segment of the program, the most challenging segment of them all. It's the Power Rankings.
The Big 12 Power Rankings. A weekly rank of all 16 programs, from the elite to the bottom dwellers.
Mitch, we've known each other quite some time. We tend to get along, don't you agree?
Definitely.
This is when we don't. This is when you and I. This is where you and I start to do the knockdown, drag out kind of stuff. But we ended up coming together on this first week. It was a little bit of a back and forth, but no problem. We'll get through it. Our power rankings, for the most part, like we have to be. You and I have to be unanimous. Like we can't split things. We fight off the air about some of these rankings, but this week pretty straightforward and some surprises, because you know what, it's not our power rankings without a couple of surprises here. So let's just go off going from 16 down to 11. First off, Houston, bad showing against UNLV. I mean, look, UNLV is a little bit more of a talented Mountain West team than we've seen. I mean, who are we kidding here, Mitch? UNLV scored 27 points before you even saw a score at all out of Houston. This is going to be a bad Cougars team, and we kind of assumed it was going to be, but, sometimes we get shocked. But, man, bad showing against UNLV, 27-7. A loss, one of the only 2 losses in the conference this week. And, if you're West Virginia and lose to Penn State, you don't feel as bad because it's a good Penn State team. But, man, they looked bad against UNLV.
It's going to be a long year for Willie Fritz in year 1. Donovan Smith, QBR of 3.5. Yeah, that was QBR, not good for Houston. Number 15, the Cincinnati Bearcats, and it's year 2 under Scott Satterfield. I thought last year Cincinnati was bad. They were the worst team in the Big 12, and hey, they get a win today. They take down Towson. I don't think there's much to take from it. It was a ball game at half, but Cincy gets the win and avoids embarrassment. I think that's the spot you're looking for when you're a team like Cincinnati.
Yeah, and look, again, between 16 down to about 12, this is going to be a toss-up. You're going to see some teams go up and down if you're familiar with the power poll. But Baylor, look, this is probably the biggest hot seat in the entire conference. Would you agree? Because you're looking at the Baylor Bears. You have Tarleton State come in. This is an in-state one for them. They fired off 28 points in that first half, and they were able to blow it up. And 45-3 over Tarleton State. That's fine. Baylor's got a lot to prove, though. That's a really, really bad FCS team with Tarleton. So there you go. If you're going to be wondering about whether or not this team is going to be good this year, we don't really know. But man, next week will be a huge test for them because, of course, they go to Utah. Technically, not a conference standings game. But obviously, they're going to be able to see if they're made of anything when they come to Salt Lake City and see what's going on with this Utah team.
Number 13, the biggest tumble in this week's rankings was West Virginia, who falls after a disappointing performance against Penn State. And look, I love that West Virginia challenges themselves in the non-conference. I admire that because it felt like there were way more FBS versus FCS games in week 1 than I can remember, Alex.
Yeah.
There was a lot of those matchups. And for the teams like West Virginia that stepped out of their comfort zone and played someone, I commend them for that, but they did not look good. And that's something that's concerning. And the thing is that West Virginia, Neil Brown felt like they got disrespected, but their 9 wins last year, they benefited from playing the 4 newcomers a season ago, and I just always had this fear that they just played a weak schedule last year, whereas this year it's not weak. They got a tough non-conference with Pitt and Penn State, and a loaded Big 12 schedule. I just feel like West Virginia takes a little bit of a step back. They know who they are identity-wise with their ground attack, but I feel like they take a little bit of a dip. Number 12, Texas Tech. They get that close call against Abilene Christian in overtime.
Yeah, Joey McGuire's got a lot to prove, and frankly, look, anybody can move up and down, especially in these lower numbers. You got to kind of do a lot to. You might fall a couple of spots, but you could do. If you have a good win, you could pop right back up in these power rankings again. So 52-51, not a good showing against an FCS opponent to win in overtime to eke one out. Speaking of eking one out, Colorado. This is probably the best FCS team that you saw facing off in the conference against a team. Colorado gets the win. They have to lean on their 2 first-round NFL draft picks in Travis Hunter and Shedeur Sanders to be able to get the win. But Coach Prime avoids the laughingstock situation for this weekend. Number 10, Arizona State. How about Kenny Dillingham and his guys absolutely blowing up Wyoming? That's a nice showing first week.
It was, and they put a lot of resources in the transfer portal along the trenches, offensive and defensive line. They lost B.J. Green, which was a big blow to their defensive front to Colorado, but they feel like they've got more depth than they have had in a few years. And, Dillingham, I think this could be a bowl team, and I thought that was a strong showing against an FBS team, and that stands out in this crowd because, again, I think you got to give a little bit of a reward to thumping an FBS team. It's one thing to beat someone 48-7 and it's an FCS. It's another when you're talking about a Wyoming team. It was a 9-win squad a year ago. So, that's earn your flowers, Kenny Dillingham. That was a good performance in week 1 this season. Let's go to number 9, team we haven't brought up yet that a couple weeks ago you thought, no way they're going to ever reach 9. That's BYU after a strong showing against SIU.
It's one of those I wonder what we're doing here, Mitch, if there's a little bit of bias because we were obviously both at that game. We watched this one closely, and you give a couple of extra points for dealing with the adversity that they did a couple of, a couple days before with their DC, Jay Hill and the heart attack situation and all that. So, but, man, I thought they showed out, and, they had a quarterback battle. You wondered if they were going to pick the right guy. At least right now it looks like they made the right decision with Jake Retzlaff. And that's a nice win for BYU. How about TCU at number 8? They get an FBS win against an ACC team in checks notes, Stanford. Their first ACC home game in Palo Alto, California. Makes tons of sense.
It sure does. That's the new world we live in. I mean, honestly, when we talk about making sense, just reeling off this 16-team power rankings, it's a long list. It's like, wow, we're having to take some real time to piece this thing together. But strong showing from TCU. BYU fans know when Josh Hoover's good, he can be really good. And he threw for 353 against Stanford. Cam Cook, underrated running back. I mean, again, this league is just loaded. Cam Cook's got 81 yards against Stanford. I thought Stanford put up a better fight than I was expecting. I thought TCU was going to just blow the doors off them. But, TCU gets a win and gets the season off on the right footing in 2024. Number 7, Iowa State. Sound, solid victory against a good FCS team, North Dakota. I think the rule of thumb in the FCS ranks is to not play any Dakota schools. Well, they did. Iowa State did, and they won 21-3.
Yeah.
Kind of a vintage Iowa State performance.
Yeah, and Rocco Beck picking up where he left off last year, 20 for 26, 267 and 2 touchdowns, no picks. That Matt Campbell's got his guys dialed up, and you play North Dakota. I know it's not a state, right? North Dakota State, South Dakota State. But yes, it was a good win for them over the weekend. Not a lot of points scored, but that that doesn't really matter necessarily. So you get the win, and that shows out. And for me, that's one where I look and I say, that's a team that we look at and we go, that could be an absolute dangerous team at some point this year. Even Utah, who has to host the Cyclones up in Salt Lake at some point, that's going to be a tough one for them. How about UCF at number 6? We went back and forth about this one, but gave them a little boost week 1. It was a nice win for them. They blew the absolute doors off of their FCS opponents. So, scoring 57, that could be a very scary team, that one. And both Utah and BYU have to go to Orlando this year.
And what's frightening is they ran for 454 yards. R.J. Harvey, Penny Boone, one of the best 1-2 tandems in college football in the backfield this year. R.J. Harvey is probably the most underappreciated running back in college football. He is so good. 11 carries, 142 yards. I wasn't that impressed, though, with K.J. Jefferson, I will say. He had a pick, but you don't have to look that impressive when your team's running for 454. Heck of a performance by UCF's offense. Number 5, Arizona, when you talk about offense, we mentioned him earlier, T-Mac, going for 300 receiving yards. I think Arizona just stands pat. I think there's high expectations for that group this season. They feel like they can maybe get to the playoff. But I think those on the outside, Phil, year one with Brent Brennan, there's going to be a little bit of a transition. And you saw glimpses of that by giving up 30 points to a pretty weak New Mexico team. There's going to be a filling out because last year at season's end, Arizona was one of the best teams in college football. I mean, they were playing outstanding. They've taken a step back from that level of play on the defensive side, but Arizona is going to be a tough out in this league week after week.
The Kansas Jayhawks, that's on the list. By the way, this 5, we're going to see probably some movement there. It's like who's going to push the top teams out of the top of those rankings. But the Kansas Jayhawks, nice performance from them. They dominate, checks notes. Lindenwood, everybody's favorite FCS team. But, yeah, probably the weaker of the FCS teams that we saw facing off against teams here in the Big 12 this week 1. But number 22, Kansas, with a win over Lindenwood, 48-3. Jalen Daniels, everybody's wanting to know what that guy is going to do. And obviously, when you take on an opponent like that, you just want to get out of there with a big win, and they do, and then not get injured, which he doesn't. And so that's good for the Kansas Jayhawks. That
it was. First appearance for him since the BYU game last September for Jalen Daniels. Number 3, Oklahoma State, the Cowboys. We gave them a little bit of an edge over Kansas because the opponent that they played, South Dakota State, the defending 2-time FCS national champions, Oklahoma State took care of business against a good FCS program. So the Pokes, they go to number 3. I think you and I agree that we're a little more down on Oklahoma State than maybe most in the Big 12 media footprint because I get very guarded with that team because they have taken a dip in the recruiting as of late with Mike Gundy. He was annually getting top 25 classes. Now they're in the 50s. And I just always get a little bit worried when I see those trends. How realistic is it to be a Big 12 champion? Because if you're a Power 4 team, you've got to be an annual top 35 recruiting program to contend for a conference title. But, Oklahoma State, they got the best running back in college football in Ollie Gordon, and he showed out well once again.
Yeah, and what's interesting is think about last year at this time when we were talking about Mike Gundy and absolutely dropping the ball at the very front end of the season. Who did they lose to last year that we were who was it? Oh, Southern Alabama, right?
Yeah, South Alabama.
South Alabama. They lost to South Alabama at home, and so I think they looked at each other and went, you can't have something like this happen again. And to do it against South Dakota State, I think that's at least a better showing than they had last year at the front end of their season. Kansas State.
I will say, too, with Oklahoma State that Ollie Gordon, I appreciate Mike Gundy just saying, you know what, he's going to play. He might have had a DUI, but he's going to play. So there wasn't this ongoing issue with, is he going to play? Is he not going to play? Sometimes as a coach, you can just say, hey, this is what it is, and then the story goes away. Something to think on going forward for coaches.
If a place is going to go, if a story's going to go away, it's in Stillwater, Oklahoma.
That's a good point.
Right? That's exactly where those stories tend to go away. Kansas State, number 2. I think people look at this team and Utah as being the class of the conference and a great start to the season for the Wildcats. It's going to be a very, very, very – it's going to be an interesting season because Kansas State doesn't really have that tough of a schedule. They don't have to play Utah in the regular season. Utah doesn't have to play them. They fire off a game against Arizona that doesn't count as the conference game like Utah has against Baylor. But, man, a game against Arizona, one of the top other 5 teams at the top of the conference, and that one doesn't count against your conference schedule. So Kansas State, number 2 on the list. And, of course, number 1, Mitch, the Utah Utes.
The Utah Utes holding it down, and rightfully so. I mean, they're the preseason favorite, and they did everything that you would expect from a number 1 team in the league against a far inferior Southern Utah team, but they thumped them. And, Cam Rising had a half of work, and did a really nice job. Only had 5 touchdown passes, and Utah rolled and did everything that would say, yeah, that's going to be one of the best teams in the Big 12, and they hold down that number 1 spot. And that's our Big 12 power rankings this week for week 1. So that's a jam-packed, loaded segment here. Every single week we'll roll out our rankings here on First and 12. We're taking the time out. On the other side, we'll dive in more into that Utah football game as the Utes jump out to a 1-0 start after taking down Southern Utah. It's Mitch Harper, Alex Kirry here on KSL News Radio and the KSL Sports Zone.